Hi, my name is Katie Hartnett, and today I'm going to be talking about macular degeneration, specifically in the visually impaired category. So first, it's important to understand what being visually impaired means. So this is an impairment in vision that negatively affects a child's educational performance, even with correction. This term includes both partial sight loss and also full blindness, and this is stated from the IDEA in 2004. So macular degeneration specifically, it is incurable. There are some forms of technology and some trials that can aid with this disease, but there is genuinely no cure for it. It is caused by many either genetic or environmental factors. So genetic factors would be most commonly seen in students as it would be passed down from their family members. Environmental factors, smoking can cause it actually. So hopefully that's not what's causing students to have the disease, but you never know. Um, it also involves the deterioration of the macula. That's why it's called macular degeneration, which is the central portion of your retina. So it causes this loss of central vision, usually, which can look like kind of a black spot or dot in someone's central vision. A lot of people with macular degeneration rely on their peripheral vision to see what's going on, since that central vision is usually lost in this disease. So there are two kinds of macular degeneration, and I actually didn't know, but my grandpa has macular degeneration, and I learned that he does have the wet kind, which is actually the rarest form of it. It's atrophic and involves leaky blood vessels, so blood vessels have like burst in his eyes, causing this. 10 to 15% of cases of macular degeneration are wet. The most common is dry, which is 85 to 90% of cases, and that's where there's just formed Dresden deposits, which are fats combined with proteins. So when we're looking at macular degeneration specifically in students, there are two diseases where it's most commonly seen or most commonly occurring. Usually older people have macular degeneration, but there are instances like with these diseases here where students can have it as well, or young children. So obviously Stargardt disease is part of macular degeneration disease. It causes vision loss in children and young adults. It's inherited, so it's genetic, passed down from family members. And this is where light sensing cells in the macula actually die, photoreceptors die. And people with Stargardt disease have trouble seeing colors. And I'm actually going to talk about some accommodations in the classroom for students who might have trouble identifying colors if they have Stargardt disease. So the next disease I'm going to talk about that is also seen in students sometimes is Best's disease. So this is where that central vision is either blurred, it's distorted, or it's completely missing. So that's when I was talking about kind of the black dot or like part of the vision that is blacked out. The macula looks like an egg that could actually burst in this case, and it's caused by a gene mutation, specifically the gene bestrophin. There are some treatments available. Like I said, no cure, but there are treatments. So the first is low vision aids. So that involves special magnifying glasses that can either be like actual magnifying glasses or using technology to magnify, which I'm also going to talk about in my accommodations. The second treatment is just sunglasses. So that can involve kind of UV ray protection. And the third is clinical trials. So, like I said, there's no cure, but there are some trials out there. Actually, I think my grandpa is participating in one. But for Stargardt disease, it can cause night blindness. So there are downsides to some of the trials, and it doesn't fully cure the disease. It just kind of aids with it. So when we're looking at students specifically with the disease, they might have trouble seeing the board. They also might have some eye fatigue. So obviously they're having to spend a lot of time straining their eyes to see what's going on. And there might also be some emotional difficulties that these students face. They might become frustrated, tired, angry with their situation. It can be a very frustrating experience not being able to see to their full capability. They also can have trouble with bright lights and glares, as well as identifying colors, which I will talk about some accommodations for that as well. So actually, speaking of accommodations, here are 7 accommodations for students. So that involves large print, color identification, seating in front of the class, audiobooks, providing magnifying devices, copies of notes and lessons, and extending assignment times. I'm going to go into each one individually and just talk a little bit about how you can accommodate for those students specifically. So the first one is large print. It's pretty self-explanatory. So when you're making tests, notes, assignments, just keeping that print large enough so students with macular degeneration can have an easier time reading what's going on. Another pretty obvious one, seat these students in the front of the class so they're able to see the board better. We talked about how students with macular degeneration might not be able to see the board very well, so placing them in the front kind of aids that. Also providing copies of notes and lessons, so that can involve either recording yourself doing a lesson or just providing copies of notes in large print. You can also include audiobooks, which I will talk about again later. Students may not be able to read as effectively with low vision, so providing them with audiobooks that they can listen to is a great accommodation. And then we also talked about color identification. So students might not be able to distinguish colors as easily with this disease. So items in the classroom, I think it would be a great idea to label them with their color. So that way, if students are not able to see what color it is, they can at least read in large print what they're looking at. Then the sixth is providing magnifying devices. We also talked about this a little bit. This can include an actual magnifying glass, or there's lots of technology that can magnify students' screens so they can view the text easier. And then the last accommodation I've listed is extending assignment time. So we talked about how students may have eye fatigue. They may be straining their eyes often. So extending assignment times, due dates, work times might be beneficial for the student so their eyes don't become as tired. I also included two more accommodations just for fun. So actually, for central vision loss, you can have students practice scanning, tracing, and following objects. So one thing I talked about was that students might look like they're not paying attention because they're using their peripheral vision. So it might look like they're looking off to the side or turning their head, but since some of them have lost their central vision, they rely on peripheral vision to see what's going on. So for that central vision loss, I think it's a great idea to have students practice scanning, tracing, and following objects. Also providing students with an outlet to talk to you. I talked about maybe students having some emotional difficulties. So I think this is a great idea to have like a Dropbox or something like that, just to keep checking in on those students and make sure they're doing okay. I also have some accommodation videos here, and I actually couldn't link them in the PowerPoint, but I transferred my PowerPoint from Canva to actual PowerPoint. But this is my first accommodation. This is my first accommodation video for students with molecular degeneration. So lots of teachers use worksheets like this in the classroom when they're teaching, and there's nothing wrong with this, but for students with low vision, especially molecular degeneration, this will be hard for them to read. First of all, because of the size of the text, and second of all, because it relies on a lot of central vision. These students often lose their ability of their central vision, which can make it really hard for them to understand what they're reading or even see it at all. So when I'm thinking about accommodations, I'm thinking that teachers can kind of redesign worksheets for their students with molecular degeneration. So this involves using a different font. I actually have it linked underneath this video, a website with different fonts for low vision students. And it also could involve moving things to the left or the right of the paper so students are able to use their peripheral vision and not as much that central vision, which they might have lost. So overall, this is easier for students to read and a great accommodation for the classroom. Thank you. All right, so that was my first accommodation video. And then I also have a second video on exploring audiobooks. So that first one was on large print, and this is exploring audiobooks. My name is Katie Hartnett, and this is my second accommodation video for students with molecular degeneration. So these students may have trouble being able to read books as their vision loss may be prominent. So a recommendation that I have for teachers in an accommodation is to look up different audiobooks for children. So I actually looked up just youtube.com and I typed in audiobook children's collection read aloud, and there's so many different playlists with books that children can just click on and go ahead and listen to. It also shows the pictures of the book up close, which is great because these students may have trouble viewing those photos as well in the books. So I really do think that this is a great accommodation, and any teacher can look it up for those students. So during silent reading time, this is my first. So it actually cuts me off at the end there, but what I was trying to say was during reading time or silent reading time, it's great to have an audiobook option so students can just kind of put on headphones and listen to the audiobook during silent reading time. I also have here in the PowerPoint a link to a study guide and handout. I'm unsure why my links don't work in the PowerPoint, but I'm going to go ahead and show it right here. Let me see if I can move this. Okay, so here is my little poster. So I just talk about what macular degeneration is, the two different diseases that we talked about, so Stargardt and Best's. I talk about some troubles that students might have with the disease, as well as the accommodations we talked about. I also went ahead and linked two more resources. So those resources just have more information about macular degeneration, which I think is really great to explore. And then lastly, I included those links again on the PowerPoint, and I went ahead and have my references all in APA format. So that's a little bit about macular degeneration. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you.